The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Today is Thursday, May 4th, 2023. Thank you so much for joining me. I must begin with the news out of New York, where 30-year-old Jordan Neely was murdered in broad daylight on a subway train while onlookers did nothing. In fact, two participated in restraining the homeless 30-year-old who got on the train complaining of being unhoused and complaining of being hungry. And because the train riders were uncomfortable, one man, 24-year-old Marine veteran, decided to step in and put him in a chokehold. The same type of chokehold that is banned by New York police officers, even though they still use it. It is banned. He put this man in a chokehold for 15 minutes, and then he died. Now, reporting on this from all parts of the media, they have rolled out the police officer treatment for this Marine. They have not released any of his information, but they have released the full medical history. The full medical history of Jordan Neely, which is how we know that he has had a history of mental health challenges. He was arrested multiple times. This is the information that they released on the victim. We don't even know the murderer's name. But what we do know is that there's a full-blown effort from every corner of the media, every corner of the political world, every corner of conservatism specifically, to dehumanize and to vilify the victim, because that is what's required for this system to be maintained. Because if people looked at this young man, this 30-year-old young man, if they looked at him with any sense of humanity, they would be outraged. But because they cannot afford to allow a white man to be actually held accountable in this country, especially a Marine, especially someone who's being cast by the media as a hero who restrained a homeless, hungry 30-year-old man who was having a mental episode. But ultimately, at the core of it, what he was complaining about was the reality that too many Americans face: homelessness and hunger. And to see the conservative movement, who fancy themselves to be representatives of the Lord Jesus Christ, you know, the same Jesus that said that when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was homeless, you took me in. It is amazing to see these same people who claim to be the representatives of Jesus celebrating this homicide, dehumanizing this individual. But you have to understand, if the conservative media, the likes of the Daily Wire with Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh and all the rest of them, who sit ready to dehumanize every single victim they can, if these individuals are not there to perform their sadistic sophistry, then the system would collapse underneath the pressure of many, many Americans looking at what is obviously true, that to be black and to be homeless, and God forbid to be suffering from a mental episode that is caused and precipitated by the fact that you are homeless and hungry. Well, if you can't get away with killing someone like that in America, is it really America? Is it really the land of the free and the home of the brave? And this is why you have individuals like Matt Walsh and Charlie Kirk, and I'll read their tweets in a little bit later, but it's not just them. It's not just conservatives. I have to shine the light on Mayor Eric Adams and the governor of New York, both of them wading into the conversation on the side of the vigilante. This is a Democrat in power as the mayor of New York, a black man who is a former cop. And I can tell you the truth, that should settle it right there, right? Look at everything that Mayor Eric Adams has done since he's been in office. It certainly has not been to the benefit of the black community. So forget about his blackness. I don't care what kind of color skin he is. How many black representatives of white supremacy do we deal with on a regular basis in this country? I don't care that he's a Democrat. Democrats we've seen all over this country have always done their part to help maintain this system of white supremacy. So the fact that Mayor Eric Adams is a black Democrat does not absolve him from his racist, white supremacist, pro-cop policies, which are intrinsically damaging to the black community Here's what Mayor Eric Adams had to say in his first statement. He said, quote, "Any loss of life is tragic. There's a lot we don't know about what happened here, so I'm going to refrain from commenting further. However, we do know that there were serious mental health issues in play here, which is why our administration has made record investments in providing care to those who need it and getting people off the streets and the subways." He misspelled that, but I'll leave that alone. "And out of dangerous situations. And I need all elected officials and advocacy groups to join us in prioritizing getting people the care they need and not just allowing them to languish." Now, keep in mind, his policy actually makes it easier to Baker Act or to institutionalize people who are going through mental health crises, and particularly homeless people, right? Just regardless if you're going through a mental health crisis or not, the legislation that Eric Adams is talking about is making it easier for homeless people in New York to be institutionalized. Here's Eric Adams on CNN last night with Abby Phillips.
So one of the reasons that this story is really hitting a nerve is because this man appeared to be having mental health issues. This is something that you've talked a lot about, but I want to read to you. This is a response from the comptroller, Brad Lander. He tweeted this: "New York City is not Gotham. We must not become a city where mentally ill human can be choked to death by a vigilante without consequence." There's also this from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Democratic Congresswoman. She said, "Jordan Neely was murdered." What is your response to what they're saying here?
Well, both the Congresswoman and the controller is a citywide leader. And I don't think that's very responsible at the time where we're still investigating the situation. Let's let the DA conduct his investigation with the law enforcement officials. To really interfere with that is not the right thing to do. And I'm going to be responsible and allow them to do their job and allow them to determine exactly what happened here.
But he wasn't even arrested. So what type of investigation is going on right now when the man who actually committed the act of murder, putting Jordan Neely in a chokehold for 15 minutes, was not even arrested? Was he even detained? Was he even detained for questioning? Or are we so far gone in this country? And the answer to this question is yes. Are we so far gone in this country that you could literally kill a person and just go and walk away? I mean, the answer is yes, because if you look particularly in stand your ground states, how many times this happens specifically to black people, specifically to black men, this is open season. The not just states with stand your ground laws, but the fact that even states like New York, under the control of Democrats, the city of New York, underneath the control of Democrats, allows this to happen without even detaining the individual. So what type of investigation are we really doing, Eric Adams? No, what's being done is that this white Marine is being given the same treatment that police officers get when they kill black people. We know nothing about the killer. We know everything about the victim. The active dehumanization that is necessary to sustain the system of white supremacy is as blatant as it always has been. The only difference now, and it's not really a difference, but there's levels to this thing. The only difference that you can see now is that you have powerful black people who have institutional power to actually change this, siding with the system that is killing black people. That's the only difference now. Is that, I mean, you've always had black people who would do the bidding of white supremacy. We've seen that throughout history. There's always going to be Judases. But right now we have black people with power like Eric Adams. And what does he do? He makes it about the mental health of the victim while his police officers didn't even arrest the culprit. Again, I want to place emphasis on the fact that what I'm getting ready to read are coming from people who claim to be Christians, who claim to be the representatives of the Lord Jesus Christ here on this planet, and they expect to go to heaven. Listen to how they responded to a young black man who was homeless and hungry who got on the train saying, I'm homeless and I am hungry. Listen to how these white evangelicals responded and tell me if this is what Jesus would do. Matt Walsh took to Twitter, and in response to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stating that Jordan Neely was murdered, he said this: innocent people are under no obligation to sit back and listen while a psychotic vagrant screams and threatens them. Now, this is Matt Walsh stating this with no more information about Jordan Neely than you and I have, right? The dehumanization. He continues and said, quote, they have every right to assume that the harasser means them harm. Neely had assaulted many people in the past, so the assumption was a good one in this case. The assumption, so the right to kill someone based on an assumption, meaning this murderer had no information about any of this man's previous encounters with the police. Because let's be sure, as they listed this young man's offenses for which he had been previously arrested, it included fare evasion on the subway. Okay, this is the kind of crimes that he's gotten involved with, and then also if you think about the fact that this young man was homeless, how many times has he been arrested merely for being a homeless person in the wrong place? But what Matt Walsh is saying is that the right thing to do was to assume that this man was a flagrant psychotic who needed to be put down. That's mighty Christian of you. And of the murderer, this is what Matt Walsh said. He said, the man who restrained Jordan Neely isn't just in the right here, he's a hero. But sadly, heroes get punished in our sick and depraved society. He leaves to get out of New York City immediately. This is the Christian. What would Jesus do? Well, let's see what Charlie Kirk would say. He said, so Jordan Neely, an insane, raving madman with dozens of priors who died after being restrained by a passerby after he violently threatened innocent subway riders, reportedly attempted to push another person on the tracks just last week. Seth Weathers, who's the new hero of the right, who started a beer company to oppose Bud Light in the aftermath of the Dylan Mulvaney story. This is what he said, amplified by Matt Walsh, of course, retweeting this. He said, quote, the dude who killed the violent subway bum better get his ass to Florida. Hope DeSantis will refuse to extradite him. It would be smart politics. Yes, because that's the thing to work. I just need to put these up here. This is just 3 out of tens of thousands of tweets from people who have Jesus in their bios, crosses hanging around their necks. These are self-professed Christians, and the level of dehumanization that they have to engage in just to make cheap political points at the expense of justice really shows you who they are. I mean, when you juxtapose what they do to what their Jesus said, like, when I was hungry, you fed me. Jordan got on the train complaining about being hungry. He said, when I was naked, you clothed me. When I was homeless, you gave me a place to sleep. This is literally what Jordan was complaining about on the train. And what is the response from white Christian nationalist devils? It's to call him a bum, to call him a flagrant, to call him psychotic. Let me just put this out here to the universe. God, come get your children. Come get these monsters who proclaim to represent you, because they're doing more than just giving you a bad reputation. They are actively harming your people, the people of good faith, the rest of us who are out here just honestly trying to live in peace with one another, no matter what we believe, no matter what we think in our lifestyle, no matter, we are simply trying to be at peace with one another so that individuals like me who really do love you, I have all the freedom that I need to pursue you. But your deranged children, your white Christian nationalist devils are without question doing the most damage, not only to your reputation as God, but to human beings on this planet. So God, if these are your children, you need to come get them before we have to.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and get twice the content and unfiltered interviews without any of the commercial interruptions.
Here we go. Very special welcome to our two newest patrons. Shout out to the Emo Dragon. What's going on, my good friend? That's my Twitter homeboy right there. Thank you so much for becoming a patron. And to Cheryl Collier Thomas, thank you so much for becoming a patron. This entire patron party is for the two of you. Turn it up. Come on. Here we go. You too can become a part of this prestigious and prodigious patron family by going to patreon.com/the BPD show, where you get twice the content, none of the commercial interruptions, and you get access to our bi-weekly patron party. It is always a blast. Patreon.com/the BPD show. And for the rest of you, we'll see you right after this commercial break.
Welcome back to the Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back. There's an article from CNN that reveals and exposes the fact that were 10-year-old children were found working at a Louisville, Kentucky McDonald's up until 2 a.m. in the morning. Now, inside of the actual article, I believe they have definitely buried the lead, because in the article, it states that those children were not even paid for their labor. So, you know, when you're forced to work and you don't get paid, there's a word for that, CNN. But across the country, we most certainly are seeing the resurgence of child labor. In fact, in Arkansas, you had the new governor, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, daughter of Mike Huckabee. We saw her sign into law, making it easier for companies to hire children at earlier ages. And in fact, there are laws all across the country that are giving children access to work dangerous jobs. In fact, in the Republican-controlled state of Iowa, lawmakers have passed legislation to roll back child labor protections. This is from CNN, quote, "The Iowa legislature has passed a Republican-led bill that would roll back child labor protections, including the hours teens are allowed to work and the establishments where they can be employed. One of the provisions of the bill would allow teens as young as 16 to serve alcohol in restaurants during hours food is being served if their employer has written permission from their parent or guardian." Among expanded work environments outlined in the legislation, 14 and 15-year-olds will be able to do certain types of work in industrial laundry services, in freezers and meat coolers, areas that are prohibited under current state law. Do you see the solution that the so-called quote-unquote free markets are bringing to the shortage in labor that came as a result of, one, millions of people dying from the pandemic? Right? We really kind of gloss over the fact that we lost at least 1.7 million people during the pandemic. They stopped counting and releasing numbers at 1.5 million, right? And I'm being kind. We're probably at 2 million people dead from the pandemic, but you know, this country doesn't even believe that it's happened anymore. That's how far gone we are. So not only did we lose a sizable chunk of workers during the pandemic, but then also other workers simply said, we're not going to let you kill us. So they opted out and quit and are finding other ways of surviving. And so with this labor shortage, instead of increasing what the free markets say do, whenever you have a shortage in the supply of labor, if you increase the salary that you're offering or the wage that you're offering, then you would get those workers back. Oh, but no, these people who really believe in the free markets, they're like, not so quick. Don't honestly believe for 1 second that we're going to let the free markets benefit labor. No. They bring back child labor, children serving alcohol, working in laundry, in industrial laundry facilities, working in meat coolers, working at McDonald's till 2 o'clock in the morning. Okay, this is America-owned capital. This is America capitalism, which is unique and distinct from any other type of capitalism, to be sure. And don't get me wrong, capitalism, period, is the problem. But when you look at just how far America is willing to go with the excesses of capitalism, with the horrors of capitalism, and their complete and total unwillingness to actually engage in free market principles, but instead use the force of the government to provide child labor so that they don't have to worry about these pesky unions. They don't have to worry about these pesky adults who have the unmitigated gall to say no. Why would you worry about them when you could just get Sarah Huckabee Sanders and the Republicans in Iowa to sign legislation that makes it easier for you to hire children? And if you choose not to pay them, don't worry. CNN won't put that in the lead. They'd put that in like paragraph 5 for you to realize that those two children who worked at 2:00 in the morning at McDonald's never even got paid for their labor. ProPublica has been doing amazing reporting on the sheer amount and the extent of the criminality of the Supreme Court, particularly Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and his relationship with Republican mega donor and billionaire Harlan Crow, who happens to have a Nazi memorabilia collection at his home, but that's an entirely different story. It's coming out now that not only did Clarence Thomas have his mother's house purchased by Harlan Crow, and his mother still lives there. Apparently, she's going to be able to live there until she dies. Not only did he take lavish vacations and trips with this Republican billionaire that he only met some 2 or 3 years after he became a Supreme Court justice. This is not a lifelong friend. Not only did he do those things and all but get away with it, because Democrats aren't even calling them to calling Clarence Thomas to testify before an ethics panel. Nope. Well, ProPublica is reporting just this morning, it was released a few moments ago, that Clarence Thomas had a child in private school. Harlan Crow paid the tuition. Crow paid for the private school tuition for a relative Thomas said he was raising as a son. This is way outside the norm, a former White House ethics lawyer said. Well, yeah, you think? I mean, we are living in the time of the most corrupt Supreme Court in the history of this country, arguably. I'm sure there's a historian that will probably take issue with me saying that. But when we see the blatant and the transparent level of corruption that is happening, particularly with the conservatives on the bench, right? The kind of gall to have engaged in these types of behaviors over the years, not reporting or disclosing any of it. And then when you get caught, you're like, oops, my bad, I didn't know any better. The highest court in the land, Clarence Thomas, saying that he didn't know any better than to not report the contributions that he essentially got from Harlan Crow, the trips that he took with Harlan Crow, the house that he sold for his mother to Harlan Crow, and now the $150,000 worth of tuition that was paid for his grandnephew that he was raising as a child, paid by Harlan Crow. It's hard to consider that this is anything else but the most corrupt court in the history of the Supreme Court. But unfortunate for us, there doesn't seem to be any method of holding these Supreme Court justices accountable to any level of ethics, which is crazy because there's a code of ethics. I'm understanding there's a code of ethics for every other level of the judiciary, of the federal judiciary. All through the circuit courts, all the federal judges that have been appointed, every single one of them have to abide by a code of ethics and can be held accountable, but not when you get to the Supreme Court. When you get that high, who's going to hold you accountable? Well, Congress is supposed to. The Democrats, particularly in the Senate, have the capacity to do so, but there's no political will. There's no political will to actually hold this court accountable. Meanwhile, this court is executing one of the most conservative, radical conservative agendas that we've seen in our lifetimes. And so we have to sit back and watch and see whether or not this country these institutions are able to regulate themselves? Can this country hold itself accountable? Can it hold its highest court to any level of ethics and accountability? Because if not, why would anyone acknowledge or honor or follow the rulings of such a corrupt court? Chief Justice John Roberts has spent most of his time as Chief Justice trying to help the legitimacy of the court and the reputation of the court, but yet and still, this is what has happened underneath his watch. For years, Clarence Thomas was doing this. How many Supreme Court justices have engaged in behavior that, if they were on a lower court, would get them impeached? But not on the Supreme Court. Not underneath Chief Justice John Roberts, who wants the Supreme Court to be viewed as a legitimate and respected institution while he was the Chief Justice. But now we see that it is a rabidly corrupt institution that has been bought and paid for by Republican mega donors to execute a conservative agenda, which they're doing that. The one thing the Supreme Court is doing is executing an extreme right-wing agenda, and they're doing so with the efficiency you would expect from someone who's receiving this kind of money from a billionaire. I want to go back really quickly before the end of the public show and address the response to the murder of Jordan Neely. I gave you the response from Mayor Eric Adams, the Black Democrat who is showing his true colors, which is always blue and white supremacy. But I digress. I have to include the governor, Kathy Hochul. This is her statement. This is the most important part of her statement, and I want you to just listen to the sociopathy that's at play here, the sheer amount of hatred that these people have for homeless individuals. This is what she said, quote, "People who are homeless in our subways, many of them are in the throes of mental health episodes, and that's what I believe were some of the factors involved here. There are consequences for behavior." There are consequences for behavior, and so they are now lionizing. They are championing this vigilante who took and restrained a man for 15 minutes. How many stations did they stop at in that 15 minutes? Could he have not put the man off the train? Could he have not engaged with security somewhere? But this Marine, this vigilante, murdered the man. And what does the mayor of New York say? Oh, these mental health patients. And what does the governor say? Oh, these mental health people. And there's consequences for behavior. There's most certainly need to be consequences for the behavior of those two leaders. Neither one of them need to be in power. And we need to make sure that from this point forward, if it's not too late, right, mind you, because we are at a particular inflection point in American history, whether or not we can survive this is arguable. But if it's not too late, then we have to make sure that that monsters like Kathy Hochul and Eric Adams don't get back into power. Because who needs Republicans when you've got Democrats like this? Who needs conservatism when you have liberals like this? Patrons, stay tuned. I've got a lot more to go over. Everyone else, patreon.com/the BPD show, or I will see you tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
We'll make it up. You put us together. We'll make it up. You put us together.